After that, we're going to have a major announcement, one of the biggest announcements we've ever made on this podcast. So make sure that you stay tuned for that, Charlie. That should be fun.
It absolutely will be.
Hello, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie.
And welcome to the C&C Talks podcast, episode 20 of season 3. And Charlie, it's been a very long time since we recorded an episode.
Yes, it has, but we still do what we always do. Episodes coming out every week, and we talk about politics, world events, and sports. As of taping this, it is Sunday, July 14th, 2024, at about 7 p.m. Pacific time for you, 10 p.m. for me, as I'm now on the East Coast again.
Yep, and a couple of notes before we get started on this episode. First of all, we've essentially haven't recorded an episode in almost a month, and so there's just so much stuff that we have to talk about because, after all, it is an election year, and the news has been especially chaotic in the last month. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about...
We've had a near assassination attempt on one of the presidential candidates.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about several things on this episode, and then we're also going to record a second episode and release that a bit later in the week where we'll touch on some of the other stuff. So some stuff that we're not going to talk about this on this episode is the fallout from the debate or the UK or the French elections, but we will be talking about that later in the week. In addition, coming up right after Charlie's stat of the week, used to be called Charlie's thing of the week, now Charlie's stat of the week.
We've forgotten how to podcast.
Apparently, coming up after that, we're going to have a major announcement, one of the biggest announcements we've ever made on this podcast. So make sure that you stay tuned for that, Charlie. That should be fun.
It absolutely will be. But let's get right into it with one of the biggest stories this year, and that is the near assassination of Donald Trump. Colin, what do we know?
Yeah, I could call this probably the biggest story of the year so far, just in terms of significance, one of the bigger security failures this century.
We're only halfway done, and the year still has a lot to go.
Oh yeah, no, the U.S. election result, that is going to be the biggest news story of the year, no matter what it is, I assume. Hopefully we don't get into nuclear war this year, and that would be a bigger story. But so far this year, I would say, without a doubt, this is the biggest story, one of the biggest failures of security in this country this century. Of course, 9/11 would be a bigger one, but this is just a complete failure by the United States Secret Service when on Saturday evening during a Trump rally in Pennsylvania, a gunman, apparently aged about 20 years old, stationed on a building, appears to be a Republican based on what is known at the moment, opened fire, shot several bullets, and just barely missed former President Trump's head, grazed his ear, it appears, that he was bloodied after the incident, and then he was told by Secret Service to get down. They swarmed him for some reason, unclear why Trump did this and why the Secret Service allowed him to do this. Just a few seconds later, he stood up and raised his fist to show that, like, essentially attempting to show strength, and in photographs afterwards it does look like he is projecting strength. They are probably politically pretty good photos for him.
Political photos, potentially of all time. It is an instantly iconic image. No matter if you support him or you don't, you have to admit that is a truly iconic photo.
It is an iconic photo. But still almost certainly pretty stupid for him to stand up, really stupid for the Secret Service to allow him to stand up and do that when, as far as they knew, there was still a gunman who could be shooting at him. So, Charlie, what is your initial reaction to everything that's happened in the last, say, 24 hours regarding this, since 24 hours ago, as of when we're recording this podcast?
Well, my initial thoughts on it this just shows that a breakdown in the civility of a political race. The fact that a candidate nearly got assassinated. This is a really terrible day in America. I don't care if you don't support him. I don't care if you don't like him. Going so far as to attempt an assassination on a presidential candidate is never acceptable. And it is very dangerous to see how this will continue to go on. Will that happen again? Will it happen to Biden? I hope not. And I will say, I do not agree with Trump. I don't really think I ever have. I don't think you ever have. But I am very happy that he is okay. And this cannot happen again if the U.S. as a democracy is to survive.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It is really important. President Biden has actually come out and spoken several times since this incident, including from the Oval Office on Sunday night, essentially saying political violence is never acceptable in any circumstance, something that should not needed to be said, but apparently does need to be said. Now, it's unclear what this, at least as of when we're recording this, it may be known at some point, but as of now, it's not known what the motives were of the shooter, whether the shooter did disagree with Trump on things or not. We believe he is a Republican, as I mentioned already, but that, of course, doesn't mean he's a Trump supporter. And, of course, the right is trying to blame the left a lot for stoking this sort of thing, something that I will come back to, but I think it is worth pointing out that it was some of them from the right, and people like Ronald Reagan and Abraham Lincoln also shot by people to the right. That when people attempt assassinations on presidents or former presidents, it generally has less to do with the politics and a lot to do with just how mentally deranged the person is that's doing it. So there is that, Charlie. Anything else to add here? I have a few more comments, but I'll let you go now.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about, and I remember you and I discussed this actually yesterday, is as much as it's really not seen as super cool to discuss this, especially the day after it happened, but you gotta think this helps his polling numbers.
It absolutely does. Probably. I mean, I would think so, but at the same time, is there a sympathy vote out there, especially for a person so undeserving of sympathy in most cases? I mean, look, I don't know how this is going to impact the election. I assume it will. The photos, obviously, he's going to be able to use that to fundraise, to rally his base, but his base is already pretty rallied, so I don't know. We'll see what effect this has on the race, and we don't really have polling on it yet. Now, I will say, Charlie, this is a complete failure by the Secret Service.
Oh, absolutely.
You allowed somebody with an AR-style weapon to get up on a rooftop less than 400 feet away from the former president of the United States. How does that happen? Like, seriously, how does somebody get that close to a former president of the United States? It does not make sense. It's just a complete failure, something that the Secret Service really, really needs to look at. A failure that the Secret Service hasn't really had this badly since the Reagan assassination attempt, at least as far as we know. So a very, very bad look for that organization. Circling back to a point, you, as a listener of this podcast, almost certainly know what we on this podcast think of Donald Trump. And none of that changes with this. But that doesn't mean that the right way to defeat it is by shooting him. Political differences are good, and certainly my issues with Donald Trump go a lot further than political differences, but violence is still never the answer, and it is the answer that the right resorts to a lot. And in this way, I do kind of want to talk for a second about how it can sometimes be painful to be a person that has morals. Because if I really had no morals, I honestly wouldn't care about whether Donald Trump got shot. I would think, frankly, maybe not that he deserves it exactly, but that I would kind of be indifferent. Because if you look at Donald Trump and other Republicans, their reactions to other events, his reaction after a shooting in Iowa was that it was time to move on. He has glorified the violence against Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, when he was attacked with a hammer. He has glorified the assassination attempt against Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer that was discovered by the FBI
Oh, I remember
in
that.
2020. So he continues to glorify things like this, and all of a sudden now he and the rest of the right are screaming about all this political violence coming from the left. It is difficult to have sympathy for a person like that, and I still find myself having some level of sympathy just because at the end of the day he is another human, and political violence is never acceptable in any way. But like, I just don't know. I just don't know. And I listen to the calls from the right about how people like Joe Biden and other Democrats kind of stoke this with their rhetoric about how Trump's a fascist and it needs to be defeated by any means possible, as if that is what's causing the division in the country, when Donald Trump has spent the last 8 to 9 years attempting to tear this country apart. It seems nobody is more responsible than Trump and his cronies for the division in the country today. And it was a very intentional choice by them. I didn't even mention the violence they stoked at the Capitol on January 6th. And I do not think that Joe Biden stoked violence here, because I think that he is an honorable man that understands that the right way to defeat Trump is at the ballot box or in the courts or any of the other legal means necessary, and to not use illegal means. And again, it's also unclear if what exactly the motive was behind this assassination, but if the motive was essentially to defeat Trump, that is not at all the way to do it. Now, as for some Republican responses, such as Marco Rubio saying, God saved President Trump and there was some divine intervention here, okay, but apparently God instead decided to kill the Trump supporter, who we haven't even mentioned yet that a Trump supporter did tragically die because of this incident. A rally goer did die. Apparently, Marco Rubio's God protects Donald Trump, the rapist, the person who tries to overthrow the United States government but doesn't protect the school children that died in Uvalde, in Sandy Hook, or any of the other school shootings that we've had in this country. What kind of God are you worshiping at that point? And other responses such as Joe Biden should be indicted for this, for stoking this. Again, I've already mentioned I do not happen. And second, let's say Biden was somehow involved in this. As we'll get to in a minute, it would seem that he would be immune from that, according to the Supreme Court, Charlie.
Yeah, which, should we move on to that, speaking of which?
Yeah, any quick final comments about anything regarding the Trump assassination?
I just want to again reiterate that this is a very bad day for the United States.
Yeah, it's also not a time to be talking about whether it was staged or a false flag. That literally is some Alex Jones type conspiracy stuff, and is just unacceptable to be talking about.
It wasn't. It was not fake. The amount of stupidity that it would require to attempt to fake that, and the amount of intricacy that it would take, is so vast.
And having the Secret Service go along with it.
Yeah, which they wouldn't do.
Yeah, and I would say my final comment on this topic would be that it shouldn't take somebody being a bad shot to save the life of a former president of the United States. The United States should expect better from their security agencies, significantly better. And at the same time, I worry because the right is now vowing for revenge. What exactly does that mean? Are increased attacks on the life of Democrats, on the life potentially of President Biden? Because if that's the case, we better hope that the security that's in charge of that is a lot better than the Secret Service was at the Trump rally.
Oh, yeah, well, absolutely. Let's move on now to the Supreme Court. They have made some very big decisions while we've been gone, including some that have far-reaching consequences and may affect policy in the Supreme Court moving forward. Colin, what has changed?
A lot. We'll get to the immunity decision in a couple minutes, because to the extent that the Supreme Court stuff is still making headlines, that's the one that's kind of really making the headlines. But I think that there's other really important decisions that the Supreme Court made that cannot be overlooked. The first one, Charlie, is essentially saying that you can make it a crime to be sleeping on the streets, even if you have nowhere to go other than that. What are your thoughts on that ruling?
And if I have this right, that case was brought by a small town in Oregon, no?
I believe that is correct. What are your thoughts on that case?
I think this obviously has wide-reaching effects on homeless people, obviously, and as well as policy regarding their treatment and what states and cities can do to them, about them, and policy surrounding them. And I think this
Yeah.
will definitely be a blow to advocates for people who are homeless.
Yeah, here's my thought. Look, I get, especially if you're someone that lives in the city. I live in the city, and I get why people don't want people living on the streets. It's not great for public health. Great. But to make it a crime, especially if there really is nowhere else for these people to go, you're essentially they're essentially committing a crime that they have no option but to commit. Like, what are you supposed to do with these people? Is your plan just to house them all in prison? Because
I think that is their
that
plan.
appears to be the plan, and that's not an acceptable answer because our prisons are way too unsafe and overcrowded. So I'm sorry, that's not an acceptable answer. Look, I believe more than anyone else, we have to solve the homelessness crisis. It's a big problem in the city I live in, Seattle. But this isn't the solution, is making it a crime, because so many of these people do not have other places to go, and that really concerns me. Now, Charlie, another big decision by the Supreme Court is arguably the biggest judicial power grab in a long time. It's the overturning, Charlie, of Chevron deference, which is essentially the doctrine that the Supreme Court ruled on many years ago, that says that they will defer to government agencies on regulations. Essentially, they'll defer to the experts in terms of interpreting a regulation. Now, the Supreme Court saying this is being left up to the courts. This is a ruling that arguably could make the federal government dysfunctional. You're essentially burying lawyers in paperwork. The federal government cannot run without Chevron deference, because otherwise, essentially anything can be challenged. Like, truly just about anything.
Yeah, I mean,
And
that certainly is a slippery slope.
yeah, I mean, just a extremely consequential ruling in all the right ways. Now, Charlie, we do have to talk about the immunity ruling, with the Supreme Court ruling 6-3 with John Roberts writing the majority opinion, and conservative judges agreeing with it, that essentially Donald Trump is immune, sort of, for what they describe as official acts. Essentially, the president has complete immunity for all official acts, and this could include sending SEAL Team 6 on your political opponents. This could include bombing American cities that you might disagree with. This could involve a lot of this. Frankly, I would argue this ruling made Watergate legal.
Yes, and I do have a question, by the way.
Sure.
I remember when this first happened, they were saying that they didn't yet have essentially an understanding of what exactly official acts mean. Have they since clarified that?
No, they essentially, as it relates to the Trump case, they sent it to the lower courts to determine whether these were official acts. But it's an even more slippery slope, because if it's bordering on official acts, then you can't admit things in evidence that may be related to official acts, such as conversations between the president, people at the Department of Justice. So definitely a huge concern there. Charlie, the president of the United States is not supposed to be a king. The founders made that very clear, and this ruling by the Supreme Court goes against just about everything that the founders of this country stood for. It really goes against their entire idea of this country. So I do want to know your thoughts more on this.
This is huge, obviously. The president can now essentially, when he's in office, do whatever he wants, which is dangerous, obviously. He can, as you said, deploy SEAL Team 6 on a political opponent, which can happen, as we have seen recently. There can be lapses in the Secret Service, which could lead to a disastrous thing happening. As you said, bombing of American cities can happen, which is dangerous. I think that this is a very big mistake by the Supreme Court because it essentially allows, as I said, the president can now do whatever he wants.
Yeah, and also, like, the only way for this to be challenged again, for this to go back to the way that it actually should be, is for a president to go back and do these crimes. The only way now to make sure that you do not have a situation like this where a president can essentially do whatever they want because the Supreme Court ruled that they were essentially above the law is by making sure that somebody that would do something like that is never close to the office of president of the United States. And like we know that Joe Biden won't do that. Now, if Joe Biden did stuff like that, what would the Supreme Court rule? They'd probably rule that he's not immune from it. But Donald Trump, who has been promising to essentially use the Justice Department to go after his political opponents, to put journalists in jail, to potentially deport American citizens, to lock immigrants in Nazi-esque concentration camps. Apparently, he would be immune from all of that, according to the Supreme Court. And to kind of raise the stakes, I do want to read part of the dissent from Sonia Sotomayor that she wrote. Is the quote: "The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, authorities he will now be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune. Immune, immune, immune. Let the president violate the law, let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain, let him use his official power for evil. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's message today. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution and use the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent." Charlie, that was the closing to Justice Sotomayor's dissent in this ruling. What do you make?
Well, I think it was very well said, and I think it has a lot of very good points in it. And I think that was the right decision. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I just do not see where the Supreme Court got this ruling from. There is absolutely no basis in the Constitution for it, in case law for it, in literally anything that the Supreme Court is supposed to be interpreting, and it's an even further disgrace that two of the justices who were ruling on it, which again, this pertains to Trump's case regarding January 6th, one of them was married to one of the organizers of Stop the Steal events, and another one of them flew a Stop the Steal flag at multiple of his residences. Neither of them.
Him. It was his wife, according to him, anyway.
Yeah, well, sure. Neither of them recused themselves. In addition, 3 other justices were appointed by the man that they just helped give immunity to. None of them recused themselves. And I would echo Sonia Sotomayor with fear for our democracy. This was a dark day in American history, essentially ruling that the could be a king in every possible use of official power.
Which is a terrifying prospect.
A very terrifying prospect. And one other thing to bring up, which is that if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking, be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That's from Sotomayor's dissent. None of the other presidents before Trump needed this, and they were all able to do everything that they might need to do without any fear of being criminally prosecuted for it. A president does not need that immunity if they are doing their job like to the best of their abilities. Truman was never indicted for, nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He didn't need immunity from that
No,
because immunity wasn't a thing.
We can debate if he should have done that, but
Sure, but he wasn't indicted for it. He didn't need immunity from that. The President of the United States does not need immunity unless they are committing crime. Why does Trump need immunity? It's because he has been indicted for dozens and dozens of crimes. That is why he needs immunity. Now, as a result of this, sentencing was delayed in his trial in New York. This case should not be impacted. They're debating whether it should. I expect that it won't be because none of these crimes were committed while Donald Trump was in office. I guess the argument would have something to do with evidence that was maybe used during the trial and whether that is admissible. But we'll see. Sentencing, I believe, now scheduled for September. It was supposed to be just a couple of days ago. This past Thursday. Charlie, let's move on.
Hey, Colin, you know what I like about Louisiana?
What?
The fact that they can do something completely against the Constitution and be completely fine with it.
Is this in reference to the Ten Commandments?
This is indeed a reference to the Ten Commandments.
Yes, Louisiana is forcing the Ten Commandments into school. That it has to be posted in every school. Yeah, Charlie, like you said, this seems pretty unconstitutional.
Because it is.
To violate that whole separation of church and state thing that once again our country was founded on. But wait, I look at the Republican movement at the moment. It really is a Christian nationalist movement, and people like Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri have admitted as much. They've essentially said that that they're a Christian nationalist party, and yeah, that should kind of terrify the heck out of everybody. The Ten Commandments do not have a place in school. At least not in public school. If you go to a Christian school, then sure. It's a Christian it's a Christian thing. I'm not a Christian. Why should I be forced to pay attention to the Ten Commandments? It's not part of my religion.
I want to ask you something, by the way, that I've heard people say. I've heard this said on Twitter. I actually know someone who said something similar along these lines, that they were suggesting, well, why should the Ten Commandments not be allowed in school if the pride flag is allowed to be shown in schools? Colin, what are your thoughts on that comparison?
It's not a comparison because the pride flag isn't a doctrine. It's a symbol of acceptance of a group of people, that a group of people can exist in society. And one of the worst comparisons of all time is that Christians are a persecuted group. They are not at all a persecuted group. I'm sorry, is not a thing. I will say, though, it is ironic to see Republicans touting the Ten Commandments, continued support of Donald Trump, who has possibly violated every single one of those commandments. You shall not
Colin, I have a question for you real quick.
Yeah.
Why would you add possibly? There's no possibly there. That's just what he did.
Well, isn't there a thou shalt not kill in there or something? I don't think he's personally committed. I don't think he's personally committed murder.
Not being religious whatsoever, I do not actually know what the commandments are.
Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. He's done that.
Generally, I believe what I think it says is just be a decent person, basically.
Yeah, and Donald Trump is anything but that, as we have mentioned most episodes.
Again, that doesn't mean he should be assassinated.
Correct. It means that at the ballot box, you should maybe consider not choosing the person that wants to be the dictator on day one for president of the United States. But apparently he'll be immune from that if he does it. Couldn't possibly face prosecution thanks to this Supreme Court. All right, moving on, Charlie. The United States has reached a plea deal with Julian Assange that sets him free. Of course, Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, accused of leaking classified U.S. Military documents, has been detained in the UK.
Yeah,
the U.S. was asking for
this guy. Yeah. What? Here's a question. What exactly did he do?
Yeah, he.
I know who he is, and I know of him, but I still don't actually know what he did.
Yeah, so Julian Assange, he's been accused of leaking military documents from the U.S. WikiLeaks, the platform he founded, and he has been in prison in the UK for a while. U.S. has been trying to extradite him for a while, now reaching a plea deal with him that allows him to be set free. So he's been a very, very controversial figure as people have debated the line between the free press and also, not leaking classified documents. And so, very controversial figure. He's definitely served a lot of time in prison already in the UK, will not serve any in the US. He's been freed back to Australia.
So why was he in jail in Great Britain?
I think that's where he was when they arrested him. And
Oh, so he's
awaiting
leaked a bunch of
extradition.
stuff from a bunch of different governments then.
Yeah, yes, he has.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, no, very
Man, this
problematic
guy's not
dude.
messing around.
Yeah. Regardless of whether you think that what he did was a crime, it was still definitely not in the interests of the United States at all. I will now move on from that to Rudy Giuliani. He had his law license suspended several years ago. Now it's official in the state of New York. He has been disbarred.
Again, someone who did something bad, finally facing justice.
Some karma there. And then Charlie, we'll talk about RFK Jr. and the brainworm that's accompanying him for a minute, okay?
Yep. Just some little bit of a lore backdrop here. We made an agreement when we first talked about the brainworm that we would have to mention it in every single episode after that, and we have continued to stick with that.
Every single time that we mention RFK.
Oh, good. Oh, RFK. Speaking of which, how's the brainworm doing?
Okay. We only have to mention it one time.
Okay, yeah. See, that's the issue. Is that we end up with something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So, but anyway, Charlie, I have a question for you. You have a dog, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, would you ever leave it on top of your car like Mitt Romney did back many years ago?
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't. Okay. Yeah, because you love your dog, right? You wouldn't do something like that.
Yes, that would be very bad for my dog.
Yeah, and would you do the Dr. Oz and kill it in some inhumane experiments and put it in like a sealed garbage bag? Would you do that?
No.
No, because you're a good person and you love your dog.
I'm guessing that RFK did.
I'll get there. So, would you ever do what Kristi Noem did, which is take it out to a gravel pit and shoot it?
No. I'm realizing how many politicians have done this.
Quite a few. Now, Charlie, here's the big one. Would you ever eat your dog?
Oh, jeez. Did he really?
There appears to be photographic evidence of him barbecuing a dog and eating it. Barbecuing a dog.
No. That's bad. That's really bad.
I'm not done, because in that same article, he was accused of some pretty serious sexual misconduct. And he was asked about it, and...
Man, in the same article,
yes.
Shows that he potentially ate a dog. He also has some allegations of sexual harassment?
Yeah, and...
How?
There's a long profile on him by Vanity Fair.
He's bad at this.
Yeah, but Charlie, he went on TV and he was asked for comments on it, and his comments were that he's not a church boy and that he has so many skeletons in his closet that if they could all vote, then he could run for king of the world.
Does he think that's a good idea? I think we should stop talking about this because I have lost about 75% of my brain cells during this last 30 seconds of us discussing him.
You think I'm done?
Where I actively die.
You think I'm done because I'm not. Because in addition, when he was asked,
more?
Yeah, when he was asked whether other women might come forward with other allegations of sexual assault against him, he said, "I don't know. We'll see what happens." That is not how you answer that question.
A person that can tell him to stop being a moron.
Yeah, he was. In addition,
I don't really like him that much. But even I'm thinking, dude, just stop.
In addition, Charlie, went back to the dog thing.
Oh,
when he was asked about it, his response was, "I wouldn't eat a human."
Okay.
Charlie, If you
That's
have to say
probably-
that you won't eat a human, I think you've already lost the PR
Yeah,
battle.
I also don't believe him either.
No, I don't really either. And then finally, one more thing on him. He said that he won't take sides on 9/11.
What?
This guy is running for president of the United States. He said he won't take sides on 9/11.
Larry,
He ate a dog.
Let me get this straight. He's running for president of the United States.
Yes.
The United States, which just I don't know if you know this. This might be hard to believe. New York is part of the United States.
Yeah, they were attacked on 9/11.
He wouldn't take a side on 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Again, let me
Man,
run through
that
this
brain
again.
worm did some damage.
Exactly. Well, let me just run through this again. This dude said he won't take sides on 9/11, ate a dog, said he wouldn't eat a human because he had to say that, had sexual assault allegations against him, said he wasn't sure that more and that he had a lot of skeletons in his closet, has a brain worm in his head, has memory issues because of mercury poisoning. And by the way,
Colin, the brainworm is still in his head?
yeah, they haven't gotten it out. It's dead, but it's still there.
How are they going to get it out?
They're not. They're going to leave it
Oh.
there.
Okay, that's probably not.
Yeah. In addition, kept a diary of all of the 30 some odd women that he had affairs with between his couple wives, including one of his wives which he drove to suicide. He's super anti-vax, and he wants to be the next president of the United States. It doesn't make sense.
I'm still just processing the fact that in the span of I understand we haven't recorded in about a month. But if you're a presidential candidate, in the span of a month, if you get accused of eating a dog, if you get accused of sexual assault, you say you won't take sides on 9/11 in the span of a month. Who are his PR people?
Did I mention that there's photographic evidence of him eating the dog?
No, you didn't, or I didn't hear you. That is disgusting. That is a disgusting act by RFK Jr.
It's pretty bad. Charlie, we have a big announcement to get to in just a minute. First, it's time for your stat of.
Yes, it is. It is that time again, and I have had a while now to come up with a stat, and I was looking through just some old football games as I was bored, and I saw something that surprised me.
Sure.
In Dan Marino's final game,
Yep.
his Dolphins were in the playoffs, and they were playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jaguars won one of the most lopsided games of all time. They forced 7 turnovers and intercepted Marino twice in an absolute blowout. The question is, what was the final score of the game?
Let's see. You said an absolute blowout. I'm gonna guess that the Dolphins scored, but I'm gonna guess that they did not score 10. I'm gonna guess that they maybe scored 1 touchdown.
Yeah, the Dolphins have 7. How much did the Jags score?
You said it was an absolute blowout. 7 turnovers. I'm gonna guess it's in the 40s. I'll go with 45.
45-7. Correct answer is 62-7.
I was not close at all. Oh my!
It is the largest playoff blowout in NFL history. And if you want more cool facts like that, you can check out my new channel, G Time Sports. Speaking of sports, let's get on to sports.
And Charlie, as promised, we have a major announcement about this podcast. Charlie, in about a week and a half, the Olympics are going to get underway from Paris, and today we are announcing that
if the summer could get more chaotic.
Yeah, every single day of the Olympics, 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time, we will be live on YouTube, recapping all of the action. I will be there every day. Charlie will be there
Sometimes.
Quite often, and we will also have Zach joining from time to time, Morris joining from time to time, potentially some guests also joining us to talk about the Olympics. It's going to be a wild couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about every single Olympic event over the course of our shows. We'll of course talk about the opening ceremonies and the closing ceremonies when those happen. It's going to be a wild couple weeks, and we are really, really looking forward to it. So we will see you on YouTube live daily coming up soon.
And it's going to be fun.
Yes, it is. All right, let's now move on to sports. And just like politics, some of the major stories from sports from the past few weeks. We're gonna leave till our episode later this week, but Charlie, we're gonna start with some soccer. Let's start with the European Championships, and we missed a lot. I think that on our last episode we only recapped the first games of the group play, and we went from there to now. Charlie, Spain is the champion.
Yep, and you know who they beat?
I do know who they beat. I'm gonna let you tell me though.
Well, England did it again. This one
Is
wasn't
that
as close though. This one was slightly less painful, mainly because we beat the Dutch, which is all I wanted us to do.
they did beat the Dutch. The semifinals were the England Netherlands semifinal was pretty good. England every single game in the knockout stages were down late, found a way to get back in it. They did win a penalty shootout, I believe, in the quarterfinals and the
Against the Swiss,
semifinals.
yes,
Yeah,
which gave me several heart attacks
yeah. In the
because the
in the round of
Finland did
16
penalty.
against in the round of 16 against I believe Slovakia,
Yes,
they scored at the equalizer in I believe the 6th minute of stoppage time, then
yep.
scored very early on in
Thank you, Jude Bellingham.
extra time. Yeah, an absurd goal by Jude Bellingham, Charlie. One of the more impressive goals I've seen.
Yes, and also great job by Pickford, arguably my favorite soccer player right now.
Yes. I will say England, they did kind of get a cakewalk to the final. Their draw just ended up being fairly easy with
The
Spain.
Dutch weren't super easy.
What?
The Dutch weren't super easy.
Sure, but Spain, Germany, Portugal, and France were all on the other side of the draw. France just didn't look that great the entire tournament. Had a real time scoring goals. They did get to the semifinals. Nearly beat Spain, who had several players that weren't able to play due to being carded. Charlie, the quarterfinals of the two of the matches went to penalty kicks. France, Portugal, and England and Switzerland, and then the Spain-Germany game almost went to penalties. There was a goal by Spain very close to the end of extra time that scored it, and then the Netherlands beat Turkey without needing help or via the penalty shootout.
After coming back from being down 1-0.
What?
Yeah, the Dutch were down 1-0.
Yes, to Turkey. Yes.
Second half to win the game.
Yeah, the round of 16, not especially notable. Portugal did manage to beat Slovenia on a penalty shootout after Ronaldo missed a penalty kick earlier in the game that would have given them the win. He managed to redeem himself in the shootout there. But beyond that, the round of 16 games were not especially notable. However, that final day of group play, Charlie, this is why it really is the greatest sports, or up there among the greatest things in sports, definitely. In soccer, some of the drama late in those matches was just absolute. Charlie?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just how impressive it is, just how close this group stage really was. There were only really a couple of teams that I didn't really feel had a chance at all, and set up an absolute great knockout stage with all the teams deserving to be there, and a couple of very good teams got early exits just because of how good the competition was. Like like Turkey, like Germany.
Well, I will say a country like Croatia going out in the group stage after just incredible drama late in that game.
Shall we talk about Copa America, by the way? Because that game's still going on somehow.
Yeah, we will talk about Copa America. It's 0-0 at the end of regular time. I believe that in the finals they do have extra time, unlike the tournament, and still tied a penalty shootout. But Charlie, I think we should start with the United States getting knocked out in the group stage. There's absolutely no excuse for the U.S. getting knocked out in a group that had Panama and Bolivia in it, but they did badly, and Greg Berhalter out as the U.S. coach.
Which, after a loss like that, is necessary.
I mean, honestly, is it a blessing in disguise that they lost so that they were able to get rid of Berhalter?
You could argue that. And also, by the way, I don't care that we lost in the finals. At least we made the knockout stage.
Yeah, but you guys invented the sport of soccer.
Okay, and the Spanish are also really good. You lost to a group that had Panama and you said Bolivia in it.
Bolivia, yeah. It is bad. It was a dark day for U.S. soccer. The first time ever.
Group, by the way,
who was what?
Who was the other team in that group?
Uruguay, who made it far. They looked good in this tournament.
They got third.
But they did get third. But the U.S. was the first ever Copa America hosts to be eliminated in the group stage under the current format for Copa America.
Oops.
Just completely inexcusable. Canada got further. Canada not only got to the knockout stages, they got to the semifinals. And they did that in a group with Argentina, Chile, and Peru in it.
Yeah, and had to face Messi, and they lost, but...
They lost to Messi twice. Not really to Messi, but to the team, because Messi was okay.
And now he's injured, by the way.
He did go out with an injury in the Copa final. Charlie, kind of the other big storyline from Copa America was just how bad of a job the U.S. has done hosting this event. The field conditions, predictably, were not good at all, but then the final got delayed 75 minutes due to problems with crowd control, and that's putting it mildly. Serious problems with crowd control. People getting into the stadium without tickets, just essentially swarming through security. People that had tickets. What?
Didn't you say they were going through the vents?
There were people that went through vents. There were people that couldn't get to their seats because non-ticketed people were there. There were people that couldn't get into the stadium. There was press that was confused.
In Miami, no?
Yes, exactly. You think that given that it's an NFL stadium, they would have experience
and
dealing with large crowds.
There.
Exactly. So yeah, you'd think it would be easy for them. It's clearly, for some reason, a challenge. There were a member of the press, credentialed, who had gotten through, was tackled because they thought that there was someone that shouldn't be there. Charlie, serious changes have to come before the World Cup in 2026, because I have serious doubts right now about the U.S. host major events like this at the moment.
Well, as do I.
And deservedly so. All right, let's move on to...
Given the fact that the World Cup is going to be much bigger than Copa is, and if you have people going through your vents for Copa, then you're going to have way worse than that.
Exactly.
For the World Cup. Now let's move on to the Stanley Cup. Speaking of cups, let's go to the Stanley Cup.
It's been a while since this one ended.
The comeback didn't happen. It's unfortunate, but hey, Canada didn't win.
Of course Canada didn't win the Stanley Cup.
Because Canada can't win the Stanley Cup.
No, it was a great comeback by Edmonton. And Charlie, I gotta say, after Game 6 was one of the coolest things I've ever seen, the way Edmonton... Just one of the cooler scenes I've seen in sports.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell they had the momentum, and they were so close in Game 7.
Well, it also... Game 7 was the first game in the Stanley Cup that I had actually watched start to finish. And I kind of forgot, especially a game like that, just how intense playoff hockey is, especially like a Game 7. But because the entire time during that third period, especially during the 6-on-5, it's edge of your seat the entire time.
Oh, absolutely. Which is why we can't wait to have the Kraken back in the playoffs when they get
exactly. Playoff hockey is... Hockey has one of the best postseason sports, just because of how intense the action always gets at the end, because it's constant.
Since we're here, I think what we should do is we should rank the major four in terms of playoffs.
Let's start with the easy one. The NBA is worst by far.
The NBA is the worst, and it's not particularly close. The issue is that the finals has fallen off super hard. Like, Colin, what was the last good finals in your opinion?
2022 was good but not great. 2019 was good but not great.
It's 2016.
Because injuries. It's probably 2016, and then 2015 was also a very good, but it's been
the East in 2015 was really good. The West was mediocre.
No, I mean the finals, not the playoffs in
Oh
general.
yeah, no,
Just the
no, the
finals.
finals were great,
Yeah.
and 2014 was not great. 2013 was good. Next, I think you gotta say baseball.
Yeah, and I think the only reason for this is that baseball is just too much of a regional sport. It's just not enough of a national sport that it's not a
And
sport
the
that's
other
super
issue,
easy to get
and the other
invested in
issue is
with it's not your team.
and the other issue is by the time you get to baseball playoffs, you're already so done with the season. They've already played hundreds of games.
Especially like if your team isn't in it, it's so difficult to watch because like you've watched
Which is
your
why, as
team
Mariners
for
fans, we don't really
yeah.
care about the playoffs at all.
Exactly. Like, well, hopefully we will this year, but it's not looking good at the moment. We'll get to that on our next episode. But then I think NHL, I think I have to put the NFL higher just because the NHL it goes on for too long, just like the NBA. It's two
Yeah,
months
well,
essentially.
I will say, I do think that the NFL has had the same issue as the Super. Not necessarily with how well the championship has gone. The Super Bowl's been great, but we haven't had any like really super close playoff games in like this past year. I mean, the AFC Championship game is really the AFC has been not great. The NFC's been
Yeah.
good. The NFC's been
The
pretty
NFC
competitive.
Championship game was really good this year. Heartbreak for the Lions. Think that I think that Wild Card Weekend in general hasn't been great the last few years. The
No,
exception might be
the
the
most
Packers
entertainment
beating the Cowboys, but
Yeah, the most entertainment I've had from that is that aforementioned comeback the aforementioned Cowboys game you talked about, and the Chargers charging all over the place and then losing to the Jaguars.
that I will say that like it hasn't just been like there have been like exciting storylines. I will say there were so many storylines in last that it kind of made it fun.
Yeah,
But in terms of the
the
actual
issue with
quality
last
of the
year's playoffs,
games, it
Colin,
wasn't great.
the issue with last year's playoffs is there were so many interesting storylines and all ended boring way possible.
It had, I mean, but the Super Bowl was exceptional.
There were so many cool storylines, and then we just ended up with the two teams that everyone thought would be there anyway.
Sure, but again, the game itself, the Super Bowl was incredible. In fact, do you
Okay,
remember? Because we had a live stream. We had a
yes,
live
the
stream
first half
after
sucked,
that.
and then the second half was possibly two of the best halves of football I've ever watched.
Well, no, again, we had a live stream after that. Do you remember the comp that I gave that game?
I don't, but I remember it being very positive.
It was the my comparison for this past year's Super Bowl was the 2022 World Cup final.
Yes, it was. That was the way your that was exactly.
Yeah.
Man, that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Then, so I think we're in agreement on that list for the most part. It's time to move on to tennis. We will be talking about Charlie's thing, Formula One, next episode. But in terms
Something
of
interesting happened.
I know something interesting happened in my sport too, which is Wimbledon. As well as the last couple weeks, and it was pretty. It was a pretty good tournament. Carlos Alcaraz winning again for the second straight year in a final against Djokovic. This one was not as good of a final as last year's final. This one was, I felt like, a more obvious changing of the guard. Now, that's not to say what Djokovic did this tournament wasn't super impressive. He had knee surgery just like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Still made it to the final, although he did have a relatively draw to get there with several of people in his way either losing early or withdrawing due to injury. But still impressive that he was able to get there, but he was just no match for Alcaraz in the final. It may have been the greatest match Alcaraz has ever played in his life. Just incredible stuff, except for he nearly choked badly in the third set. He had 3 championship points, lost them all, got his serve broken, but then was able to win it in a tiebreaker, something that's very hard to do against Djokovic, who's historically very good in tiebreakers. Carlos Alcaraz just won what's called the Channel Slam, winning the French Open and Wimbledon in the same year. He also now has won 4 of the last 8 Grand Slam titles and is 4-0 in Grand Slam finals. He's 21. Carlos Alcaraz is already one of the all-time great players, and he still has so much of his career left. And I look at like when Djokovic retires, where's the competition? Yannick Sinner, maybe, but he lost. I mean, I get he was sick, but he lost to Medvedev. Like, it's not that I'm saying Sinner can't be that guy that's next, but so far he's won one slam. He hasn't, I don't think, fully proven yet that he can be that guy on the men's side. So, I mean, Alcaraz is, I think, just going to keep winning for a long time that he can stay healthy. Now, on the women's side, the draw fell apart. Swiatek, the number 1 woman, lost early. Sabalenka withdrew. Rybakina lost in I believe the semifinals. Goff lost early in the tournament, and it ended up being Barbara Krejcikova, someone who I don't think anybody had. She comes through, wins the women's Wimbledon final. The last few years, really, the Wimbledon final, the winner has just kind of come out of absolutely nowhere. But overall, a really exciting 2 weeks of tennis in London, and Charlie Princess Kate was actually there to present the trophy. Surprised a lot of people.
Yeah, it certainly did. But I think that'll do it, no?
That will do it for this episode of the C&C Talks podcast. Make sure to subscribe because we have episodes coming out weekly wherever you listen to your podcasts. Our website, cctalks.com, has everything you need to know about the show, and you can call us with your questions at 360-389-2630. Again, that's 360-389-2630. And you can follow us on Twitter at CC Talks Podcast. You can follow Charlie at CC Talks Charlie. You can join our Discord server at cctalks.com/discord. All this information and more is in the description below. But for now, for our producer Morris, production designer Zach, I'm Colin.
I'm Charlie, and we will see you in a couple of days.
It's good to be back.
It is.